Act 6. Reading the Calligraphy. Our quest for signal in Scott de Martinville's tracings. Scott intended to make sounds write themselves, so it's only natural that he saw his tracings as brush strokes. For Scott, this was a form of automatic calligraphy, replete with its own conventions and aesthetics. But for those of us seeking to extract the original sounds that created these traces, Scott's results are frustratingly imprecise. As he had no intention of playing back these traces, he didn't need to observe the basic technical requirements of sound recording that we all take for granted. For instance, the requirement that the recording stylus stay in the groove, or in this case, on the paper. For Scott's purposes, it didn't matter if the stylus lifted off the page once in a while. And then, of course, when the stylus came back down, it often smeared the trace. In 21st century terms, there's a lot of missing and ambiguous signal on these recordings. And that's not the worst of it. Here's Scott's diaphragm and stylus assembly from his patent application of 1859. The stylus is made of two pieces, a stiff but yielding shaft, he's used a hog's bristle here, tipped with a small piece of feather. Remember, he was inscribing in soot, and a thin stylus, like a hog's bristle, would not draw a discernible line in the smoke. He needed a feather brush to make the calligraphic strokes visible. Here he shows how the recording head addresses the recording surface. Notice how the tip of the stylus hits the paper at an angle, thereby skewing the signal in the trace. Again, while not an issue for Scott, this is a big problem for us because sound recording demands that the stylus move absolutely perpendicular to the time axis. All of Scott's recordings are skewed to some degree. In some cases we can compensate for it in the image domain before converting to sound like this. But sometimes the skew is so bad and the travel of the stylus so great that the tracing loops back on itself. It actually moves backward in the time dimension. I believe that with the right model and a lot of trigonometry, these tracings may someday be untangled, but until then, no image to audio conversion software can handle this signal as expressed on the page. The documents we discovered at the Society of Encouragement for National Industry are rife with these shortcomings. They are, after all, from Scott's first year of experimentation. And that's why I declared in my phone call to Patrick that we'd never get sound off of them because Berkeley's software couldn't track them. But as I said, Patrick proved me wrong. Here's how. Here's a phonautograph tracing as processed by Berkeley. Their software tracks the center of the trace in the image domain and converts the centered signal to sound. But what about this crazy waveform? You really can't track it because it's often in two or more places at once. So Patrick wondered, what would happen if, instead of tracking the waveform exactly, we could get just a close approximation? He took as his inspiration the optical soundtrack used in film, in which the analog audio signal is represented by the amount of light that gets through the soundtrack. Changes in brightness correspond with changes in audio amplitude. Patrick's technique fills in the area on either side of the trace. It ignores the trace's center and fills only to the two edges. It rearranges the parts to resemble a film soundtrack, then scans the track for brightness using image-to-sound software. The result is an audio waveform. Comparing the resulting waveform to the original phonogram, we can see it's not a perfect representation of the recorded trace. But therein lies its brilliance, because the trace itself can't be played. It's not directly interpretable by any form of virtual stylus available today. But the waveform created by Patrick's process can be played. It is interpretable by the ear, and that's what counts at this stage of study. Patrick's approach offers a robust forensic tool that lets us hear at least something from phonautograms that are otherwise unplayable as inscribed. We can hear the melody of a song, for instance, or the pitch and cadence of speech, and what we hear helps us better understand Scott's activities and intentions.